Did the killer not know that D saw him? Did their eyes not lock at some point? Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. So what we're dealing with here is a situation where the killer may have seen that he was seen and then actually returned to the crime scene again a couple of hours later, before the survivors had alerted the authorities, and obviously in a situation where this person that had seen him was a threat to him, and obviously he was a threat to her. And of course there are two ways of interpreting this. One is that he didn't see that he was seen, and the other one is that what if their eyes did lock? And what if that is the reason why the killer returned to the crime scene at 9:32 a.m. He should have been sleeping, right? He'd been up all night, and for some reason he couldn't sleep, and he returned to the crime scene. Well, bear in mind, at this point, the cops still hadn't been alerted. And as far as we know, and as far as the killer knew, no one had been alerted. He also knew, based on those 4 drive-bys, that the entire household really only went to sleep at around 4, which meant even by 9:30, anyone inside would still potentially be still within their sleep cycle. Does that make sense? So this was a potentially particularly dangerous scenario for the survivors. And had the killer gone away, come back, and then killed another person, well, then that would have been seen as a serial killer and a serial killing, because you would have had that cooling off period. Before we get to the rest of this analysis, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. I have to just say on a personal note, I have been wanting to deal with the what needs does he serve by killing analysis. I wrote it out some time ago. It took kind of the whole day, but it just takes so much out of you to go into those dark places. I just haven't really felt ready to do that, to narrate the script today, so maybe I'll do it tomorrow. Also, this episode you're listening to now is essentially part 2 to the one that immediately preceded it. It takes a heck of a long time to do longer than 20-30 minute edits to episodes, so I try and break them down into 10-15 minutes. Anyway, if you're enjoying this episode, if you found this one and the last one meaningful, worthwhile, please like, share, leave a comment, and let's get started. So just think about it. The killer comes back at about, according to the narrative of the affidavit, at 9:30, in fact, at exactly 9:32 a.m. in the words of the affidavit. That's on Sunday morning. That was still many hours before 911 was called. Now, I must say, one of the things that occurred to me after I put up the previous episode was this whole idea that the media narrative says that one of the survivors called law enforcement and said that one of the victims was unconscious. I wonder whether that's a deliberate misstatement from law enforcement to make the killer assume that the survivors aren't actually being forthcoming, aren't actually telling the truth. Or was that actually what was said in that 911 call? Bear in mind, the person who said that someone was unconscious, I don't think was necessarily the survivor, but someone who was on scene. So it could also be an innocent misunderstanding. How likely is that? Could it be that that law enforcement were trying to do a mind job on the killer by making it seem as though that the roommate wasn't a threat to him and was already being dishonest about what was going on? Was that deliberate in order to protect her? Now, I want you to imagine this. I want you to imagine this Elantra slowly pulling up to the same neighborhood where he'd done his sort of bloody work sometime earlier. By this time, he's showered, he's changed his clothing, maybe wiped a little bit of what is inside the vehicle, changed his shoes, and now he's back. Had he gotten some sleep, or wasn't he able to sleep? And so while he's there, while he's sort of skulking around on the outside, was he tempted to go inside a second time and make sure that D didn't live to tell the tale? Someone has seen him, and he's sitting outside the house, and in a scenario where nothing is going on, the entire neighborhood is quiet, everyone is still asleep. isn't he tempted to just go back inside the house? I mean, theoretically, could just go back through that sliding door. The main difference is just that it's daylight. And I guess that someone could come over. Another scenario that I think is worth pondering is if the killer did return at 9:32 and is in that area, did he actually see something that we don't know about? In other words, did he actually see kids streaming to the house, swarming around the house, walking up that little ledge that I mentioned previously, going in and outside and sort of having these very urgent discussions? In other words, much earlier than we thought, was there actually activity at the house trying to deal with the situation? I mean, if you were an eyewitness to a murder, if your life was suddenly and immediately in danger, because that's what happens in a situation like that. You're a witness to a murder, well, you're a imminent threat to that murderer. And so if you don't call police, you would call someone else, wouldn't you? You wouldn't want to simply remain alone in a big house. That would make you vulnerable. What if the killer returned? Well, it looks like he did return. And maybe those friends, if they were there, actually saved her life. If those friends, if they were there and he saw that, maybe that did actually prevent him from taking any further steps. And there have been rumors that someone called and tried to implicate a fraternity, that a fraternity were doing something. Well, this sort of idea of keeping secrets and not being entirely truthful plays with that in terms of the public perception of this, doesn't it? Now, I didn't quite finish the presentation that I was trying to do in the previous episode. This whole idea of, was the killer playing games with the killer, mind games with the killer, and also basically doing a bit of a mind fuckery with us, right? Was law enforcement actually playing coy to the media and the public, or were they actually primarily lying to the killer, trying to lure him out, trying to, not soothe him, but trying to give him a false sense of security? Were they trying to effectively pretend that no one had told them anything and that they did have nothing? Didn't we have that perception that, wow, the cops have nothing, they don't have a suspect, they don't have any clues, they've got no idea? And weren't they basically trying to repeat the euphemism that everyone was asleep in order to make sure that there wasn't some kind of additional attempt on one of the survivors? Now, bear in mind, in terms of this whole idea as well, the time frame they gave was between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. And I mean, they had to have known that that couldn't have been accurate. Wasn't that also to give the killer a false sense of confidence that no one had actually seen the vehicle or him or knew the time of the incident? And I mean, we know now that the DoorDash dude could also confirm at least one of the victims was still alive and uninjured at 4 a.m. So why wouldn't you say that the crime happened after 4 a.m.? Well, that would give the killer pause. He would realize, wow, they actually do know something. How do they know? Was someone awake? Did someone hear me? They a witness. Do you see how sly the cops were in playing a sort of intelligence game? All of those press conferences weren't really to tell the media anything. It wasn't really to tell us anything. It was to address the one person they knew was probably watching and basically do a mind job on him. It's basically mind fuckery. There's a saying, it takes a thief to catch a thief. Obviously, if the cops play too many of their cards on day one, the killer simply says, thanks very much, I'll dump the vehicle, I'll shave my eyebrows, I'll get out of Dodge today while I still can. Think about the Caitlin Armstrong case, which happened in the middle of last year. It just shows how the upfront approach can backfire. I think they said to her something like, we've got CCTV of your vehicle, and the very next thing she did was she sold her vehicle. So what is better, an upfront approach where you play your cards, show your cards, or a slow, sly, subtle waiting game? It's not what social media wants. It's not what the frenetic appetite of the true crime community want. But doesn't that game work better in terms of proper law enforcement and ultimately catching someone? Don't tell the perpetrator or the public anything. And it's within this scenario of an information vacuum that social media kind of plays its own game with itself. So I think going forward, this is something to bear in mind in the future. Law enforcement aren't as stupid as they make themselves out to be. They do make themselves out to be dumb, but they are not dumb. And the idea is to catch the perpetrator off guard, by surprise, to outsmart the perpetrator who, in a way, has the upper hand. He knows certain things, and they're trying to catch up, and then they gain the upper hand in this sort of cat and mouse game. Does that make sense? So you can see how in a true crime scenario there are so many opportunities to get things wrong. I just saw today, I did post it in the community tab on my YouTube channel, something that the Daily Mail put up, a 8-point infographic showing how the IDAHO killer crept into the victim's house and murdered them. And almost all of it's wrong. They say that the suspect arrived at the house at 3:29 a.m. and then broke in just before 4 a.m. That's very likely not accurate. He didn't break in probably until possibly as late as 4:15 a.m. or 4:17 a.m. So that's very likely incorrect. Also, he didn't break into the house. He simply either a door was left open or he knew the access code. We're still not clear about that. Number 3 is that he gets into Xana Knodl's bedroom. No, that is not the first place that he went into. We know that because when the killer left, he left from Xana's bedroom. Number 4, it states that both victims were killed in her bed, but that's also not the case. Number 5, he then snuck up to the 3rd floor. Wrong. Number 6, the killer then did whatever. That's also out of order. The surviving housemate says the marked man walked past her. That's about the only thing that is correct. Point number 8 is also accurate. The killer slipped out the back sliding glass door and fled around 4:25 a.m. And then guess what? He was back 5 hours later. In the next episode, what I want to do is a mapping of the route that the killer took. So we've dealt with the inside of the house once again, based on the facts that we know. Now we want to deal with the outside, the route that the killer took, and I'll be doing that in a live probably tomorrow, so look out for that. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.